So have the bulls stolen back the benefit of the doubt for keeps, or is the case for caution rising along with stock prices? Let's ask Chris Verrone, market strategist at Strategas. Chris, good to see you.
Great to be here, Mike.
Thanks for coming by.
Of course.
What's the general playbook for when the market re-attains a new high in your mind?
Well, I think when you just look at the leadership fabric of this market, and if all I told you was, hey, Mike, industrials are at new highs, financials are at new highs, tech is your leadership, you'd be very hard-pressed to come up with a bearish call on the market or the economy here. And that's the tail of the tape today. And then conversely, all the defensives continue to weaken. Staples, new relative lows, REITs are not there, nothing from healthcare. So if you just look at this purely from a leadership perspective, you wouldn't know anything happened in April. You wouldn't know anything happened last weekend. This is a very, very strong leadership profile that continues to drive this market.
So going back to, I guess, sort of the initial weeks off the low, you know, the strength and the breadth of that move higher, it did trigger some signals, right? And you were basically saying, okay, you have to maybe start to allow for further upside from here. Are we looking for anything right now? I mean, you mentioned a bunch of things, but in terms of confirmation or the next signpost in terms of how it tends from here?
Well, Mike, I think that's right. When you go back to, I think it was the first week of May, you had the big expansion in 20-day highs. And our rule is always, when the 20-day high list is expanding, spend more time thinking about what goes right as opposed to what goes wrong. And we've certainly had follow-through since then. Now we start July here, which is seasonally still very good. And you know, in particular, the last decade, I think every July has been positive. And you kind of think about that in context of the broader call, though. Seasonality is influenced by the trend of the market, and the second half of the year tends to be strong when you enter it in an uptrend. So that's the setup here. I'm not saying we can't have a consolidation or a pause sometime August, September. That would not be unusual. But are the ingredients there of some big top formation or some big weakness? We don't see it.
What about more tactically? I mean, there's a few things that I'll hear mentioned, right? One is unusually low number of stocks making a new high themselves, even as the index has done so. That's one thing. And then some of the speculative kind of aggression in certain parts of the market, not like an overall everyone's too bulled up, but something where it seems like there might be some, some speculative stuff happening around the fringes.
So let's think about that in two ways. First, on the number of stocks making new highs. I mean, on Friday, you had half the financial sector make a new 20-day high. That's pretty good. I mean, look at the leadership you're getting from Goldman and from Wells Fargo and Morgan Stanley. There is certainly a very potent leadership tone coming from that group. 40% of industrials made a new high, 40% of tech. Even discretionary, which has basically been on the mat for the last several months, starting to show some signs of light here. So I'm not particularly concerned about the new high data or the breadth data. I think it's certainly good enough here.
And then in terms of, I mean, the general sentiment picture, you would probably say, and I think you would, it's not flashing any kind of a yellow or red light at this point. But where are we in that process?
We subscribe to the undefeated rule of Wall Street that what you think is influenced by what has happened, right? Attitudes follow price, not the other way around. And what I'm struck by is a market that's back at the highs. The attitudes are nowhere near as ebullient or euphoric as we saw at the start of the year, certainly as we saw kind of going into the April drawdown here. So I think there's room, frankly, for behavior to catch up with price. At some point, this will be a threat again. If you were looking to find spots of maybe a little euphoria, you mentioned some of the meme-like stocks or the characteristics that the market's kind of taken on that front. Watch the put-call ratio here. The put calls are probably lower than we'd like to see, but I think on balance, when you look at any of the survey data, the flow data, in particularly the areas and flows that we care about cyclicals, there is not a lot of euphoria or enthusiasm here, despite a market back at the highs.